Have you ever retired a human by mistake?
No.
1982's Blade Runner hugely influenced the sci-fi movie genre and quickly gained cult status.
I need the old Blade Runner. This is
Ridley Scott introduced audiences to a dystopian future set in 2019, a world filled with corporate advertising, pollution, and androids called replicants.
I've got 4 skin jobs walking the streets.
Now, director Denis Villeneuve and Oscar-winning production designer Dennis Gassner have updated that world for a sequel, Blade Runner 2049.
I asked Denny, I said, so is there a particular word that you can describe the film, you know, in kind of an essence? And he thought about it and he says, brutality.
Back in 1981, Dennis Gassner was working for Zoetrope Studios with Francis Ford Coppola and Dean Tavoularis. They'd just made One from the Heart, a movie for which they recreated Las Vegas on sound stages.
Neon and glitter.
And Ridley Scott wanted to buy the neon they'd used.
He walked in the art department. I said, hi, my name's Dennis Gassner. He says, my name's Ridley Scott. And I said, so you want to see some neon? He says, yeah, let's go to the warehouse. So we went down to this warehouse, and I opened up the door, and there were 2.5 miles of neon. And he almost passed out. And he goes, how much can I have? And I said, all of it. We're finished with it. And on the way back to the art department, I said, so what are you going to do? He says, well, I'm going to make this little film called Blade Runner. I said, oh, that sounds pretty cool. And that was the first time I met Ridley.
Blade Runner was shot in 1981, a different era for filmmaking. And Stephen Poster was one of the original film's photography team.
At the beginning of the original Blade Runner, when you're flying into the city, you're flying over an actual miniature. It's a physical thing that the camera is traveling over.
The sequel to Blade Runner was shot in 2016 and set in 2049. By now, the environment has become harsher, and all of the architecture, as well as the weather, needed to reflect that, including the creation of a massive seawall in Los Angeles to counter the effects of global warming and now global freezing.
Santa Monica is now underwater, and so is Long Beach is gone, so that's why the seawall is being built.
Much like the original, the sequel is a stage-set film, and in deciding on a location for the shoot, executive producer Ridley Scott suggested looking at Budapest, where he'd previously shot The Martian.
What I've created here is what I call the wall, and it's behind me, and it's the visual story of the narrative of the film. And it really starts up in the upper right-hand corner here and runs the top 2 rows all the way around.
Gassner says that the design process, or manifestation of this new future, began with the Spinner, the fictional flying vehicles from the first film.
And so this is the first thing that we designed here, which is an amazing homage to the original, but with the context of brutality in context to it. And each element of this film always goes back and draws on that as an example, from just out of a pure design sense of the angles and shapes and the feeling. It's in a little bit of disarray, but here's our spinner, who's crashed here, and we're creating. This is going to be our backlot set here. So we're working this up as we speak.
Gassner says that Budapest physically had a lot to offer, such as long dormant power stations, which acted as a trigger for other ideas.
This is the way Ridley works, you know, as you, in the original film, you put up one thing and he looks at it and they say, well, that kind of works, but that gave me another idea for something else.
A good example of Scott's creativity on set is the closing scene in Blade Runner, where Batty's on the roof with the giant rotating fans.
That was a last-minute design by Ridley. He took some foam board, cut it into strips, and took a grip stand and put holes in the middle of them and made them into kind of a fan shape. And before we started shooting, the grips would come out and spin it by hand. There was no fancy equipment done with that.
Blade Runner has long been praised for its unique postmodern production design, and for the sequel, filmmakers wanted it to feel like a natural progression. So they didn't rely on digital effects. They just used them where they were needed. Gassner says it's the ability to create bigger scale that will set the new film apart from the original movie, that it's a bigger world, and now you're able to see more of it.